Welcome to the Silicon Fox podcast, where we explore the habits and stories of high performers. I'm your host, Mitchell Eschner. Grayson, thank you so much for hopping on the Silicon Fox podcast.
Hell yeah. Great to be here.
Awesome. Well, cool. I always love to start it off with just giving you the chance to give us a little bit about your background. We'll jump into topics and as to what you're working on now and kind of some of the sleep stuff, the venture stuff, the health and wellness stuff. But really, it's always useful to just get a little bit of background on the guest.
Yeah. So I'm Grayson. Been investing in sleep for the last 5 years. Got started with Supermoon Capital back in 2019. It's myself and two partners, Pat Connolly and Mike Masterson. The genesis of the fund came from Pat, who spent his career at Williams-Sonoma. 40 years there, took the company public back in the 70s, launched West Elm, launched Pottery Barn, did a bunch of things. And, his last few years was kind of looking at their business lines and realized that the bedroom and sleep was an opportunity for them. Realized that they were selling a bunch of bed frames, but not selling any mattresses, and thought, hey, if we're going to sell a mattress, which one should we sell? One that gives you good sleep. What is good sleep? And through that process, ended up taking a look at his own sleep, recognized that he wasn't sleeping well, taking Ambien far too frequently, and thought, hey, so let's focus in on this space. And ended up connecting with ResMed. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with ResMed, but they're a
No.
huge sleep tech player. Actually, the number one digital health company in the world. They have something like 25 million connected digital devices. They manufacture CPAP machines for sleep apnea. Um, and connected with them and started taking a look at the growing sleep space and recognized that there were a bunch of new companies popping up. This was a few years after 8 and Aura and Casper had all gotten started. So this is kind of like 2018, 2019 frame. And Casper did a great job of promoting the sleep space back in 2015, 2014. Subway ads and big billboards talking about sleep. So that was kind of the first time sleep was entering the public narrative. Matt Walker had just released his book, Why We Sleep. Athletes were taking a look at sleep as a performance enhancement mechanism. So sleep was starting to enter the public conversation. Started talking with ResMed and said, hey, like there's something here. We should be starting a venture fund to focus exclusively on this growing sleep space. Science is young, public perception of sleep is growing, and consumer and enterprise demand is growing. So there's an opportunity here. And he, through that process, started thinking, hey, if we're going to start a venture fund in sleep, who should I work with? Ended up reaching out to Mike Masterson. The two of them were family friends going back years. And Mike's background was as a VC at life sciences VC in SF called Bay City Capital. Did a bunch of pharma deals, did some big ones there, and also co-founded a med device company called Nevro, which was neuromodulation for chronic back pain. Took that company public. I think it reached a couple billion in market cap at some point. But successful life sciences and med tech guy, plus a successful consumer and retail guy, came together to tackle sleep. And I was right place, right time. I've been working with Mike for the previous 2 years throughout college. Was working with him as previous business. And when Pat approached us, thought, hey, this is a big opportunity. I'd love to jump on board, and ended up doing my senior thesis on the Apple Watch. Took a look at how wearables took a look at how wearables were starting to develop and how big tech was entering the healthcare space. And yeah, fortuitous for me to be, working with Mike when Pat approached him. But the three of us came together in 2019 to launch the fund. Final close was in 2021. ResMed actually ended up coming in as a strategic limited partner. So it's great to have them on board. The number one sleep tech company in the space. Great to have them as a partner. And yeah, fast forward to today, we've invested in 19 companies, global focus, and yeah.
I love it. What was the thesis?
Yeah, the
Your senior
thesis was
thesis?
honestly, it wasn't going to be a closed garden approach that won in the wearable space. Going back to the 80s with Microsoft, trying to have Microsoft everywhere, and Apple trying to be more of a closed hardware software garden. Um, I thought, hey, to be successful in the wearable space, you're going to have to play nice and work with other companies, with researchers, with established healthcare institutions. Um, and it honestly feels like that's kind of playing out today.
Yeah, for sure.
The Apple Heart Health study, and some of these other big partnerships.
Was it more on like the macro of the wearable space, or was it specific to anything specific to technology?
No, it was definitely more macro, more strategy. I mean, I did take a look at the actual device design, and Johnny Ive working with the Nike team and the Hermes partnership and stuff. But I think for me it was more interesting to look at the broad business and commercial strategy.
Yeah, no, I'm super curious to see what plays out in the wearable space over time. I've got a lot of my
Yeah,
own theories.
it's getting very complicated and congested, I would say. I mean, back when I was writing, Aura and Whoop had started, and I actually remember my freshman year sitting on a couch in some guy's dorm room, and he was on the track team, and I looked over and he was wearing this weird device on his wrist, and I thought, hey, what is this thing? And I asked him about it. He said, yeah, it's this product called Whoop. The founder was a Harvard founder. Harvard alum, and he wants to beta test this new product with the track team at Harvard. And I was like, well, what does it do? And he was like, well, it tracks my physiology, tells me my HRV and my recovery score. And I thought, wow, this is gonna be big. And yeah, fast forward today,
No,
obviously 5 billion
it's
plus company.
yeah, no, what I'm so interested in to see is like there's this kind of divide, and I myself haven't decided where I sit, but a lot of like more deep tech health investors that are on like the healthcare side, reimbursement, Medicare Advantage kind of business model are so bearish on these businesses. And they're like, there's no durability. They're not like deeply medical. And like they're small. They're also like, to be fair, they are net like, very much net small. That market's smaller. But then on the flip side is like I'm young, part of the Gen Z kind of collective, and also I went to all the wearables, was wearing Whoop for a while, and I'm building in the wearable space, and there's like that mass movement there. So curious to see how that plays out. Um, but yeah, well, cool. I mean, so one of the big things, and kind of how I wanted to kick it off in the at least in this sleep space, there's a lot of noise. Especially as it's gotten really big. Obviously, you called out that like, hey, this got really, this finally started getting popularized in 2015, and then a lot of the wearables came out around that time, and now very much mass media. You've got all these different businesses. What are some of the things that are misunderstood? I think like in the health and wellness world, it's so hard to filter through noise because you're being sold to. So at the end of the day, who wins is who's got the best marketing, at least in the
Yep.
short run, right? We'll see
Yep.
durability. That's so difficult as a consumer. So I always like try to host these kinds of conversations to cut through some of that noise. It's like so
Mhm.
far, or at least on the investment side, or some of these businesses, especially with sleep, what have you seen as like the most misunderstood stuff or the most noise that we should kind of ignore?
Yeah. Um, well, it's funny because I'm a big believer in placebo effect, and I think it was Eric Thompson who recently wrote an article saying, "Hey, we should just be giving everybody, placebo pills because they do work." And for me, it's interesting because companies come out with products that say, "Hey, this works for women," or "This works for so and so demographic," and ultimately, sleep is not one size fits all, and products that work for you might not work for me. Um, and products that might not work at all might work for me just because I believe in it working, and the ritual effect and the routine effect of consistently doing the same thing or taking the same pill every night does have a positive effect on sleep. So to that extent, the only noise that's out there is companies making claims that aren't scientifically backed, which happens far too frequently these days. um, but I think deeper down, it's an interesting story of, okay, if this is working, who's it working for? Can it work in X setting, but not in Y setting? Is it a placebo or is it actually, pharmacological? So it's an interesting narrative right now. And I think that companies are finding success in validating their product claims. And we actually have a portfolio company called Sleep Score Labs, which just rebranded as Sleep AI. And they do outsourced R&D, including validation services for sleep companies looking to actually study the effects of their product on sleep. They've done a bunch for some big companies, including Therabody, doing work with their sleep tech goggles. And they've found that, hey, products that work for some people, not all people, different age demographics, and in different settings. So it's complicated, and um, it's still an undetermined outcome for the market writ large, I'd say.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, I guess it's a young market, so it's hard to call. But what would you say? Like, is there anything that's weird or unique in the space that does function? I think like at least social media's captured the attention with melatonin,
Yep,
magnesium, all the different kinds of magnesium.
for sure.
Is there anything super weird that you guys have come across that you've seen work? Especially actually curious to see like this company that does validation across sleep stuff. Have they come across,
Yeah,
weird things like, hey, across a decent subset of people, and this is like statistically relevant,
yeah,
there's sleep mechanisms that are working that are improving sleep for the masses that we don't
yeah.
hear about.
Yeah, I mean, some interesting ones. One was a straw insert for water bottles that actually improves your jaw muscles and your neck muscles in order to reduce your sleep apnea severity. So sleep apnea
Interesting.
has there's an anatomical cause to a number of sleep apnea cases, and by working out your jaw and throat muscles, you could actually reduce the severity of sleep apnea. Who would have thought that a straw insert for a
Yeah.
water bottle could help you with your sleep apnea? But seems like the studies prove that it did. And then another interesting one was there was a couple in Barcelona who was driving their newborn baby, down the cobblestone streets and recognized that the vibration effect of moving the stroller over the cobblestone was putting their baby to sleep. So they built this stroller attachment that went on the stroller and mimicked the cobblestone effect.
Oh wow.
Also proved that that one worked as well. So some interesting product innovation out there. Um, but yeah, I mean, are parents going to use the product? Who knows? Right? That's a whole different conversation.
Yeah, so this brings up an interesting point that I think we think about all the time in the health and wellness world, and I'm curious as to your take on it specifically via the sleep lens. Like, at what point are we over optimizing and facing diminishing returns? I get asked all this question
Yeah,
because we're building kind of something relatively niche that has a much grander vision, but in the sleep space specifically is like when I've got, and we'll dive into it a little bit deeper at some point, throughout this as well. But like if I'm waking up, looking at my phone, messing up my circadian, or if I'm so anxious,
yeah,
like seeing my sleep scores, whatever else, at what point is it diminishing returns versus actually optimizing sleep? And where do you guys kind of draw that line?
yeah. It's I mean, for me personally, I would say I'm trying to just live my life in a lot of cases, right? And there are interventions for jet lag perhaps that change your behavior and make you get up in the middle of the night in order to start time shifting prior to your flight. Um and for me, it's perhaps not worth it. I have things to do and people to see and a life to live, so for me it's probably not worth it. But there are the hyper optimizers and the athletes, the professional athletes in particular, who are looking for that 0.01% edge, and for them it might be worth it, right? And again, I think I mentioned this previously, but there are interventions that work sometimes and not all times, but there are also interventions that I might want to utilize sometimes but not all times, right? Which is, for instance, I have a big LP meeting and I feel like I should be working at my 100% peak. I might take advantage of you know uh a blackout curtain or an eye mask or earplugs in a way that I perhaps wouldn't on a daily basis.
Well, I mean, like even going beyond that. So like now that we
Mhm.
have a lot of data between like, okay, so alcohol causes worse sleep and we're starting to assess trends to understand like, hey, what causes worse sleep, what causes better sleep, what like we know what's happening where and how. And this is of course a pretty generalized take, but we start to
Yeah,
understand that, right? Like, okay, you should get 8 hours, 7 to 8 hours based on different age groups. We can kind of classify you into buckets. Overall, this is pretty known, right? So if I know this, don't take caffeine right before sleep, within a few hours
yeah,
before sleep, right away in the morning, don't look at screens. Fine, I know this. What's the next step, right? And this like
mm,
kind of bridges into my actionable part as well. But like, if we know what the high level right way is, what's the use of a lot of these technologies that go farther over optimized, that go through like, hey, here, let me put you to sleep even better and faster. Sure,
Yeah.
fine, that applies to people that have issues falling asleep. But across the masses, like, where does sleep get really useful, where it's no longer kind of diminishing returns and we understand
Mm.
what to do, and it's just kind of looking at something to make ourselves feel satisfied?
Yeah. No, that's a great question. I think when I'm taking a look at value creation across all startups, right? I often think you're either reducing the need to do something or reducing the time required to do something. I mean, take Amazon Prime, right? Next day delivery, you get your thing faster. Netflix, you don't need to watch ads. Um, you know, uh, any any Google, you get your intelligence faster, right? Things that are reducing time to value are often valuable, um, but also enhancing the moments of daily life, right? The average. So maybe water that tastes better, or it's sparkling, or better coffee, or taking something from dull to great. Um, and in the sleep space, right? You can look at, okay, if you're tossing and turning to try to get to sleep, that's wasted time, right? Or if you're up throughout the middle of the night constantly waking, that's wasted time. So solving that is solving issues. It's solving problems, right? But I also think, there's a whole nother level in terms of enhancing sleep that we just haven't reached yet. Um, and it does require basic science that, quite frankly, just isn't there yet. And I think we can get into this deeper, but like dream science and, you know, learning while you sleep, um, abling like your glymphatic cleansing while you sleep. Like there's deeper sleep enhancement opportunities that we haven't touched yet. But I do think long term will be big. I think for us, when we were getting started with the fund, it was, hey, how do we actually create a commercial opportunity in sleep? Um, with opportunities that are viable today. Um, and when we were getting started, 75% of sleep tests were done in the lab. And this was before COVID. And then obviously COVID has kind of flipped the switch. And now 75% of sleep tests or more are done at home. And so these were opportunities that were kind of glaring in your face, low hanging fruit sleep opportunities, CPAP alternatives, right? And these were the low hanging fruit. And I think now that those have been picked clean, it's starting to we're starting to think about, okay, what's next? And now that 75% of sleep testing is done at home, what does that unlock, right? Um, and again, like I think a lot about um these cycles of tech development, and oftentimes the early adopters of any technology are faced with some unforeseen consequences of utilizing that tech, and that then becomes the basis for the next tech development cycle. I mean, a random one, but like GLP-1s, right? All
Yeah.
these patients are taking GLP-1s. Their face now all of a sudden has a bunch of sagging skin, and they're totally using Botox uh and different cosmetic interventions to solve that issue, right? And that's just a small one, but you see it again and again that using a technology creates unforeseen consequences that require new solutions, and the cycle continues.
Yeah, that's super fair. And so one of the things that's interesting is, okay, yeah, I mean, one, actually, you definitely, I think this is something I'd love to jump into with you, is like all the opportunity for sleep outside of this kind of quantification
Yeah,
enhancement, but now how can we go deeper layer and like learning optimizing. There was like some Huberman
exactly.
put out this there was this study of like cold showers after obtaining new information and like the retention being stronger. And I think
Yep.
like those kinds of things are obviously difficult, but if you can optimize something while you're not even awake, it's kind of interesting use case. How often, and maybe you see this data, maybe you don't, but just curious as to your take, how often do you see actual behavior change? Because something I analyze, and I'm not nearly as deep into sleep, but at least wearables is like we get this data, but we rarely act on it. And like one of the most foundational and fundamental things is like, hey, this is supposed to create behavior change. GLP-1's a good example. Is like, well,
Yep.
it's not going to make someone go to the gym. It may give them the effects that they necessarily want, but it's not going to make someone go to the gym. So the
Yep.
second they come off of them, there's a lot of issues and side effects. And this is across all different things. And so have you guys seen interesting things that tap into the psyche, or how are you seeing businesses do a good job of creating behavior change, or is that something that's untapped?
Yeah, no, I think there's still a lot of room to run. I think multifaceted answer here. One is I think um everybody talks about gamification and that kind of becomes table stakes these days for any sort of UX. But I think deeper into this question is the concept of maintenance, right? I think often we outsource our maintenance of our bodies and our minds to new interventions, right? And say, that could be a GLP-1, right? It's a way for somebody to get the benefits of, health maintenance, maintaining their weight loss, for instance, without actually needing to do a behavior that gets them that benefit. And I think we as humans often desire anything, any intervention that gives us, you know, the maintenance without actually needing to do the maintenance, if that makes sense.
For sure. Yeah.
Um, and so I think, if somebody came out with a pill that gave you 8 hours of sleep and 2 hours of sleep, it would be this huge opportunity and somebody would make a lot of money on that. Um, and I think oftentimes with fitness and nutrition in particular, there's a lot more you know, there's a lot of different ways to actually test the effects of what you're taking. For fitness, for instance, and weight loss, you have scales, right? You can step on the scale and see over the course of a month you've lost weight. And for nutrition, you can look at yourself in the mirror and say, "Wow, my jawline has gotten a bit thicker." But for sleep, for a long time, we just didn't have those products, right? We didn't have the insight into what's going on throughout the night, which gives you, either some sort of motivation or at least some sort of ability to track that what you're doing is actually effective, right? And so I think behavior change without any sort of reinforcement loop and getting the insight that your behavior is actually working um, is definitely not going to work. And, I think right now in the sleep space, we have just in the last 5 years, really 5 to 10 years, have really developed those tools to provide that sort of insight. And now we're starting to reconnect the whole loop and give people a full reinforcement learning effect, basically, of their behavior change and how it's actually affecting their sleep or falling asleep faster, waking up better.
Interesting. Yeah. I mean, I always pitch the scenario that like, hey, UX fundamentally is what reinforces behavior and kind of actually ignites behavior change. But it's also
Yeah.
interesting to see that stuff is consolidating. I guess you guys evaluate some opportunities, so you see different areas and the newest and most frontier things in sleep.
hmm
Where do you think is the biggest gap? I think you've kind of given us a few gaps, but like where
hmm
do you think is just the most fundamental biggest gap across coaching, diagnostics, pills,
Yeah. No, I think
sleep API?
yeah, I think one opportunity that I think is just glaring for somebody to jump on is better sleep retail experience. Distribution is king these days, and right now there really isn't a good front door to sleep. You go to Mattress Firm to get your mattress, you go to CVS to get your supplements, you go to, the App Store to get some digital therapeutic. Um, Maybe you go to, Nike for or not Nike, but Lulu for your pajamas or one of these D2C brands that you saw on TikTok. And nobody has really consolidated these different buyer avenues for the or purchasing journeys for sleep into one consolidated front door retail experience. Um, I think up in Canada, Sleep Country has done a pretty good job of starting to do this. And I think Temper, with their acquisition of Mattress Firm, again, is also trying to do this, but it really is going to come from a third party, a startup who has, a different growth strategy, a different marketing strategy, speaks a different language than some of these incumbents do. Um, but I think providing a place for patients and consumers alike to really understand what their sleep problem is and find the solutions for their problems. I mean, I think it's a huge opportunity, right? And just to dive a bit deeper into this idea, um, sleep does fall across the spectrum of consumer and clinical issues. some people, it might just be their next door neighbor's dog is barking and that keeps them up at night. It may just be that, the way their bedroom is facing, the light shining through the window in the morning wakes them up too early. Or it may be that they have, clinical insomnia and their AHI is off the charts. And we don't really have a way to speak to both the patient and the consumer in sleep jointly today. And I think that's a huge issue. And patients go from, having no sleep disorder and just having the next door neighbor dog barking problem to actually becoming a sleep apnea patient. And then they go back and forth. So we need a way to speak to the consumer and the patient in sleep at the same time in the same location. Um, and so I think that's one big one. And then two, I think just taking advantage of some of the new technologies that are out there that are a bit more um sci-fi to be frank, and giving a place for patients to and consumers alike to test them, right? Because a lot of people don't want to try before they buy, or sorry, a lot of patients want to try before they buy. And so you need to give them an opportunity to try maybe a mattress or a pillow or one of these sleep goggles or the the brain interventions, right? And so, or a supplement even. So giving them a location to test products, it would also be a huge opportunity.
How sci-fi do you see this space getting? I think like part of researching a little bit for this episode, we've coming across things like programmable sleep. That's like
Yep.
REM on demand or like some kind of lucid dreaming, programmable things, or even like, maybe the more the CRISPR route of there was some gene I believe that like that Trump had or has that like lets him sleep less and yet be super effective. And so now
Yeah.
we'll have this generation of over optimizers or high achievers that are trying to do some kind of genetic modification to optimize for needing less sleep. How sci-fi does it get, and what gets you still is to the extreme still exciting for you guys? Are you guys like looking at the more practical applications? Where do you guys sit in the mix, and how do you feel about that future?
Yeah. I think, as a venture fund, we need to be realistic and invest in opportunities that have a 10 to 12-year time horizon. Um, I think we're getting closer to having those sci-fi ideas within a 10 to 12-year exit horizon. Um, and one that I mentioned previously that I'm super excited about is dream engineering. We have a portfolio company of ours called Dust, and it was founded by Adam Horowitz out of the MIT Media Lab in conjunction with a bunch of other dream researchers. And it's basically just a dream incubation company, a studio, if you will, that spins out different dream engineering technologies. One of the first products that they're working on is a commercial version of their dream engineering tech called Dormio, which can in essentially incubate um, dreams between N1 and hypnagogia. And so as you're falling asleep, it can incubate a dream, be it thinking about driving a car down Highway 1, or it could be
Yeah,
climbing Mount Everest. Who knows, right? Um, I think those are commercial opportunities in the next 3 to 4 years that can actually, become publicly adopted. Um, I think some of the deeper, farther off things like hibernation or taking advantage of this familial short sleep gene, um, those might take a bit longer, and the basic research just still isn't there. Um, but we are continually super excited about some of these big opportunities, and I do like researching and thinking about them and talking to people who are on the frontier of sleep. It does get me excited. I mean, we sleep for 8 hours, and it's a third of our life essentially. um and if we can take advantage of it or shorten it or enhance it, not only is it a huge opportunity commercially, but also, it's going to change the world. So, um, I do get super excited about the sci-fi stuff, and I think 50 years from now, I could all see us having hibernation pods and going to sleep and dreaming about being the first man on Mars.
that's awesome. I love it. Are you gonna sign yourself up for these? You said people want to try before they buy. Are we gonna see you signing
Yeah,
up for some of this stuff in the next few years? Hibernating.
I think I'll pass.
V-
I
What's
I
what's
think that
the
there's a world for it, but I think I'll pass.
the worst? What's the usually or no winters or summers? What's like the least deal flow in venture capital? Maybe the
Mm.
hibernation of the
Winners.
VCs.
Well, it
All
depends.
right.
It
Well,
depends. I think
we'll
late summer is the worst, and then you know, Christmas holiday season is pretty bad too.
I can sell hibernation technology to all the VCs for the
Exactly.
time
Exactly.
off. I love it.
Hibernate through the dark ages.
Yeah, that's fun. I love it. Well, cool. One thing I want to talk about like a little bit is your guys' investment process and like a little
Yeah.
bit shifting more to the investment side. Curious how you go about. I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, maybe you can throw out some numbers for us as how big this market is, but it does seem relatively niche as to how many companies there even could be developing here. So how do you guys go about from sourcing to envisioning what kind of market share these companies take? How do they add? What is the value add
Yeah.
and the value creation? Is this a zero sum market or is it growing fast? But just give us some color there.
Yeah. So, numbers around TAM opportunity and sleep widely vary. 50 billion to 600 billion, growing to a trillion by the end of the decade. Um, I would ballpark it somewhere between 250 and 500 bill. I think, and that includes everything from sleep apnea interventions to drugs for sleep to supplements to mattresses, bed frames, pillows, the consumer side. Um, I think what's great is that there's a bunch of net new opportunities being developed. It's not just a better mousetrap, it's also new ways to catch the mice. Um, I think with the stuff around, dream tech and the more futuristic stuff around the horizon, I see that number continuing to grow. Um, when we think about our portfolio companies, at least in Fund One, a lot of it, like I said, was low hanging fruit. I'll give you one example. Enso Data, they're a AI company doing workflow automation for sleep providers. Previously, you go into a sleep lab, you take your sleep test, and a technician has to go through the sleep test line by line and identify every episode of apnea, other other sleep spindles and all the different metrics that a sleep test in the lab produces. And these sleep tests took an hour on average, and the techs, it was costly and expensive to outsource this labor to these groups of technicians. Um, and it was super inconsistent. Like you would score a test one way on one week, and then a following week you'd score it completely different. It's just um and so Data saw this and we're like, okay, it's a perfect opportunity to use AI to automate the diagnosis of sleep apnea. So came out with a great SaaS product for these sleep providers to score these tests, and saves the sleep labs a ton of money, and reduces the time to actually get a sleep apnea diagnosis. So that was a clear, low hanging fruit opportunity. um, and across the portfolio in Fund One, we saw a number of other ones like that. Endel, which is a company out of Berlin doing functional soundscapes, they saw that, on Spotify, Apple Music, YouTube, one of the most searched for sounds was sleep soundscapes. People like to
Yeah.
fall asleep to either white noise or, the rustling branches of the night, just some some random nature soundscapes. Um, and they realized there was a way to bring some science to that and develop these functional soundscapes that you can pair with your Apple Watch and your other, Aura Ring and stuff, and it drives these soundscapes based on your physiology. Pairing your heart rate with the beat of the sound, changing it based on time of day, weather patterns. So pretty interesting product development there. But again, that was more low hanging fruit where they just recognized the problem that existed out in the market, being non scientific soundscapes, but a ton of consumer demand. So, um,
Do
portfolio. Sorry, go ahead.
do all the founders? No, this is super important. Do all the founders in the sleep portfolio have better than average sleep?
It depends on if they're fundraising or not.
Okay, so fundraising, no. Then I mean, like,
Fundraising, no. Otherwise, yes. Yeah.
okay, yeah. Sorry, good. I just had to ask them, but sorry, you were saying.
No, no, no. And it's funny, like I live, breathe, die, sleep, right? And I definitely live the brand. And it's fine. I'll be out at dinners or whatever, and people are like, "Oh, were you off to?" And I'm like, "I'm getting ready for bed," and it's like 9:30.
Yeah, I mean, you
But
have to.
I feel like I got to live the brand.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Well, we got to figure out your
Yeah.
sleep stack as well.
Yes, we'll get to that. But yeah, just back to the portfolio, like fund one, like I was saying, just a ton of low-hanging fruit in the market. Um, and I think thinking about market sizing for these portfolio companies and thinking about total addressable market and all that, um, to me, I mean, the TIM is always everybody sleeps, most people don't sleep well, right? But at the core, everybody sleeps. So, ultimately, sleep is one of the few markets that, for the most part, everybody has bought a sleep product. It could be as simple as a mattress or as complicated as, a full tech stack with supplements and uh, a better pillow, or, one of these headwear devices, um, sleep earbuds. But everybody has bought something for their sleep. Um, and you can't really say that about most markets.
That's fair. Interesting. And what
Yeah.
about like the sourcing component? Like I'm guessing when there's probably a few funds that you guys compete with, um, for like that, at least the specific niche. But I'm guessing also the companies that are doing pretty well and pretty hot rounds, all classify into
Yeah.
like the digital health space. So that those get, I'm sure they get competitive. Um, how do you guys go about sourcing and kind of the investment process or even the diligence process beyond, let's say, TAM? Interesting things about maybe like founder specific to building in this space, or do
Yeah.
people have these specific issues and they go out to solve these problems? Just curious as to that kind of archetype as well.
Yeah. So, I mean, different ways to take this. I would say on the sourcing front, a lot of our deal flow has been inbound from other VCs who are taking a look at the sleep space and don't really know how to look at a company, or the subcategory within the market. They reach out to us. They say, "Hey, what do you think about this? Have you seen competitors in this category? What do you think about the tech itself?" And so I think a number of our deal flow comes through that source. And then I would say a lot of deal flow comes through our sleep science advisors who we work with to be out on the market, working with companies, doing studies on new products. And they often get contacted by startups looking for scientific advisors or scientific expertise on their product roadmap. And we work with a number of them and they share deal flow with us. And I guess third would be, founders of our portfolio companies who are reached out to by other founders in the space, who are looking for advice, and they say, "Hey, just met with so and so. They would love to intro to you," and that's how that source comes through. Um, I think one thing we're trying to do a bit more of moving forward is just tap into novel deal flow, like, categories, I'd say. I think a lot of, especially health and wellness VCs, focus particularly on the US market. And I mean, it's just, it's Silicon Valley, it's New York, and it's LA. But there's a huge and quickly growing health tech community down in Australia. And I think, Australia is actually leading the way when it comes to a lot of this futuristic next gen wellness stuff. And so we're really trying to expand our network down there. We have one portfolio company out of Sydney, and we're trying to focus a bit more on the Australian market. Um, but sourcing is always an interesting one. There's some VCs who spend all day taking a look at markets, and others who spend all day talking to founders. And I think for me, it's as a younger VC, it's really trying to find my niche and figure out what's working for me and how can I compete versus other VCs who have a lot more years of experience and a lot bigger networks than I do. um Trying to figure out how I can kind of raise my flag and say, "Hey, this is what I'm thinking about, this is the way I'm thinking about it. If you're thinking about it like me, come reach out."
Interesting. I'm so curious what's going on in Australia because we've actually experienced the same thing. It was the second place where we launched our beta because
Yep.
yeah, something's going up in Australia
Something's
despite
in
the
the
fact
water
of
down there.
yeah. I mean, everyone's also
Yeah.
pretty fit there, so that makes sense. Well,
Yeah,
cool. I mean,
exactly.
before we jump in, I want to jump into rapid fire, but before we jump into that, I would love to just, I mean, we got to know your sleep stack. This seems like, you know, you'd be the best
My
person to ask this
my sleep
question.
stack is actually super simple. It's a $2 eye mask that I bought off Amazon. It's mouth tape because I do have probably incredibly mild sleep apnea, but I do mouth tape. I am a mouth taper. It's not actually any of these new brands that have come out with mouth tape. It's just the Next Care paper tape that you can buy at CVS. Um, I use melatonin when I'm traveling, and I start with a higher dose the first day after I get to my new location, and then I slowly taper, um, over the next 3 or 4 days, and then mattress, I actually do need to upgrade my mattress. I was using one that I was testing as a potential investment, for the last 3 years. We didn't make the investment, so that should tell you something about the mattress quality. Um, and then and then pillow, I'm big into the bamboo pillows, which I do love. And then fortunately I don't have a clinical sleep disorder, so nothing on the clinical side. My business partner Mike has sleep apnea and he's an avid user of ResMed. I think he has the AirSense 11, not sure though. I think he has like 4 different air senses. But I guess lastly, I do use Endel, which is the sleep soundscape company I mentioned. Love their product. I use it more for focus and than I do for sleep. But if there's a loud neighbor's dog or something, then I'll turn it on in the middle of the night to help me, block out that noise. Um, yeah, for me, environmental optimization is the number one thing I can do besides the small behavioral things like, no coffee after noon and keep my workouts to the morning if I can. Um, I do like a good sauna or a hot tub towards the afternoon, like late afternoon, evening. Um, let's see, I get a workout in every day. So all the simple behavioral things I like. But in terms of interventions that I need, product support for, mostly just environmental optimization stuff.
I love it. I love it. It's good to hear that we're keeping it simple. Well, cool. I want to jump into
Yep,
just a quick rapid fire with you. So I'll just ask a
of
question and let me
course.
know the first thing that comes to mind. What's the weirdest person you've met?
Does my dog count?
No, it's not a person, but you know, we can call it that for the sake of it.
All right.
What industry or breakthrough are you most excited about outside of sleep?
Neurotech. Neurotech, dream tech. But outside of sleep, I mean, biotech, broadly speaking, I think, AI is going to unlock some crazy biotech discoveries. But yeah, biotech, broadly speaking.
What's the best thing your parents taught you?
Stay hungry, always stay hungry. And I guess corollary to that is be passionate about things. If you're hungry and passionate, um, you'll get to the frontier of a field or of a topic, and there's always stuff left to explore. And I guess that's why I said, there's still things to be explored on the planet, because I always believe that the frontier is undiscovered and there's more we can do, more we can find. And I think in searching for the frontier and pushing the needle forward, you learn things about yourself in the process, and I think that's a life well lived.
I love it. I love it. And the last one, it's this game that I love playing with people. Just teach me something interesting. You could take a second to think about it. Something not about sleep, preferably, and just as if I'm a newbie. Give me like a 30-second lesson on something fun and random.
Okay, random one, but I travel a ton, and actually recently just got back from Kazakhstan, and
Okay.
you can everybody has a different way of packing their bag. Some people are folders, some people are rollers, some people are packing cube people, some people stuff their socks in their shoes, some people wear their shoes around their neck. Everybody has their own style for packing. Um, I've realized that whatever you do, you just have to literally sit on your suitcase as you put things in so you can get every last inch completely full. Um and yeah, I would recommend being a roller, but if you have your own preference and
Okay. Yeah,
style
I was
and
gonna
you're a
ask.
folder, then No, I'm a roller. I'm a roller.
Okay, overall, yeah. So am I, and I travel a good bit too. So I feel like we got
Good.
something there. Yeah, you got to
Yeah.
use the air suction things.
Always.
I
Yeah.
love it.
Yeah.
I love it. Well, Grayson, thank you so much for hopping on the Silicon Fox podcast.
No, this is great. Really enjoyed it.
Uh,